I am Tony Maurer, and this is my grandfather, Frank Maurer. He was born on 6/18/1953. He was in the Navy, and his highest rank achieved was E3. And my mom is recording this right now. And this interview is being conducted for the Veterans History Project at the Library of Congress. So, Grandpa, can you talk us to a bit about your childhood?
My childhood?
Yeah.
It was a normal childhood, I guess. Just an average childhood.
Okay, where were you born?
Wyandotte, Michigan.
Okay, and what were your parents' occupations?
My mom was a beautician, and my dad was a pressure operator for Michigan Consolidated Gas Company.
Okay, do you play any sports?
When I was younger,
Yeah.
I did play all the sports, baseball, basketball, and everything else. But then I got into boxing when I was about 10 years old. And I boxed from the time I was 10 till I went into the service.
Okay, and do you have any other people in your family that were in the service?
My brother Ed was in the service. He was in the Army. He was an MP. And he was stationed in Vietnam.
Okay. Can you tell us about your initial boot camp?
You know, it was in San Diego, California. It was a lot of drills, a lot of, back then it was just a lot of basic drills, PT, and we got, Navy doesn't shoot as much as the other branches of the service did, so we ran through the shooting ranges, but not in depth like they do in the Army and the Marines and the Air Force and stuff like that. And when I went in, it was mostly like a desert. So in other words, it was hot during the day, and then at night it got really cool. And and basic training is just hurry up and wait. You ran everywhere, and then when you got there, you just waited till you got your shots, because you got all your shots in the service. Then you would run to your meal. You never walked anywhere. You ran everywhere you went. And that was just part of the training, because what they want to do is they want to break you down and teach you respect, basically. So you were taught to obey orders, be civil and things like that. So it's a good training. And I think, and I hate to say this, but I think every child, everyone, when they graduate from high school, should do 2 years of service.
Do you think that boot camp was hard?
Could be, yes. Could be hard for some. Some people didn't adapt to it as well as others. Yes. And they got weeded out early. It can be tough. It can be. And a lot of people join the service and weren't quite ready for the service. And, and they had push-ups. There was a lot of, they'd wake you up in the middle of the night and you'd have to do a full-on inspection. Or you'd be standing in line. The grandpa never had that problem, but you would be standing in line, and the guy would come up and he would run a credit card on your face, and if he felt any hair, you get demoted for that. So it was all, back then, it was all to break you down to build you up. And that's basically what it was. That's just normal stuff.
Okay.
Nothing bad. Of course, they could yell at you, they could do things back then that I'm sure they can't do now, but it was a little different time back then.
Yeah. And you said that you think everybody should do 2 years of service.
I do, because the reason is, when you graduate from high school, you really don't know what you're going to do. You have no idea what you want to do. So why not go into the service for 2 years? And I'm not saying you have to go to combat. I'm just saying, do 2 years in the military. Then when you're done with your 2 years, you get out, and then you have maybe a year or two of college. So then you can, at 20 years old, you can go to college for 2 years and decide what you want to be. The military will teach you discipline, get your focusing on what you want to do in life, rather than, and I'm not saying the kids today don't know what they want to do, but they have no directions, you know what I mean? So I'm thinking, if they do that everywhere else, in Europe, anywhere in the world that you look at, they do 2 years mandatory. When you graduate from high school, you do 2 years, and then you go, then you're done. Your service is done. And that eliminates the draft, eliminates a lot of things, and you always have a replenishing thing of your armed forces. So it is a good thing, I think.
So when you went into the service, did you enlist?
I did. They did have a draft back then, and my number was high. I didn't get my draft notice though. I didn't get my actual number till I was already in the service, and they sent me my number. The draft ended, I believe, shortly after I was in, but it was still in effect when I graduated from high school.
So, can you tell us why you enlisted?
No, I had no. Basically, is exactly what I told you. I had no direction, didn't know what I wanted to do, didn't know where I was going. So I decided to enlist and see what the Navy had to offer. Maybe when I got out, I could pursue a career, something that I wanted to get.
What did you think of the earliest days of training?
They were hard. I'm not gonna lie to you, because you're 18 years old. You're away from home, and you have nobody yelling at you like they do in the service. So you have to adapt right away, because if you don't, you're gonna do push-ups, you're gonna run laps, you're gonna do things. So they teach you discipline from day one. When you jump off of that bus to get into line, you know right then, hey, this is no playground. You know it's for real.
When you came right out from the military,
Mm-hmm.
what were some of the first things you did?
The times were not that good, because the war was still, Vietnam, it wasn't a war. The Vietnam conflict was still kind of going on a little bit. So it was tough, and a lot of us were coming home, so it was harder to find jobs. So it was tough to find a job. I did a lot of jobs. I dug ditches, I roofed houses, I did carpentry work, I did a lot of different jobs, because I could only get what I could find, and that's how it was back then in the 70s when I got out.
So, you said earlier, like up until when you went into the service, you were boxing a lot.
Yep.
Yeah. So, what made you love boxing so much?
Well, I'll tell you what happened. The truth of the story was, I was a tough little kid. And I was in a neighborhood, and Mr. Charlie North, who was a police officer, knew I was a little troublemaker. And he invited me to go to the gym. He said, hey, you like to fight so much, let's go down to the gym. I said, sure. So I went down to the gym. Well, needless to say, I got my butt kicked numerous times. But I decided at that point that I was going to get good at this. So I learned how to box, and I learned how to get good. And finally I ended up beating the guy that beat me. So that's how I got into it. I was destined for a little trouble, because I didn't have parents who supervised me and watched me and guided me. So I was pretty much running wild when I was a kid, and that's probably how I got into boxing. And boxing was my salvation because it kept me out of trouble. So that's why I got into boxing. And the reason I got in was exactly that reason.
So, do you have any like big fights that you remember?
No, back then we fought a lot. I used to give a lot of exhibition bouts at the parks, at Clark Park in Detroit. I didn't have any big fights until after I got out of the service, and then I got into martial arts. And then I fought a lot of people because then I was in karate for a long time. And I fought now numerous people. When I got my black belt, I fought some pretty, the one guy I fought was Billy Blanks, who was a Tai Bo instructor, the guy for Tai Bo back in the day. I fought him, and then I fought a friend of his, Mafia Holloway. They were both, I fought them at Detroit Cobo Hall. There was another young man, and he's not young anymore, he's probably, but his name was Richard Plowden, who was really good, and I fought him on a couple of occasions. So those were my biggest fights. Billy Blanks was the most noticeable person I ever fought. Did I win? No, but I fought him.
So, as going back to when you were in the military, how much were you able to like contact your family once you went away?
Wrote letters. You wrote letters, and that was pretty much the extent of our contact. During boot camp, you write letters all the time, and they send them. And the nice thing about the military is no matter where you are in the military, your letters are always sent airmail free. So you know, all your postage is free. So we could contact, but I didn't really have anybody to write to. My mom and dad were divorced. I didn't know where either one of them were, so I don't, you know, I mean, I didn't really write anybody. I wrote grandma when I was in the service a few times. That's about it.
Go into a little bit of more in depth about your mom and dad.
My mom and dad. Well, my dad was a he served in World War II, and I believe he saw some things that he didn't want to see. He went in the service. He started in when he was 14 years old. He was in the Merchant Marines, and when he was in the Merchant Marines, he was on a tanker. And what that is when the tanker would fill up, and they would go out to the ships, and they would fill the ships when they needed fuel. Well, the problem with that is everybody knew that, so they were a hot commodity, and everybody wanted to bomb them and get rid of them because they didn't want the gas to get to the fleets. But then after, I think, a year or so of that, he actually joined the Navy. And he doesn't talk about it much, and a lot of the veterans from World War II don't talk about it much. But he must have saw some action because later he got into drinking pretty good, and he became abusive. But, you know, and I don't hold that against him, because I'm sure there was a reason for what he did. It just, I never knew it, and my family never knew it, because he never talked about it. I'm sure it was like they have today, PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder, and I'm sure that's what he had, but back then you bit the bullet and you just kept going. You didn't talk about your problems, and that's the way they were in World War II.
When you were in the service, did you see any combat?
No, I did not. No, I did not see any. I was off the, I was stationed, it was funny because I had three calls, and two of my buddies went to Vietnam on PT boats, and then I was right behind them, and I ended up stateside in San Diego.
Did you ever go out to any places?
No, I was supposed to be on a fleet, go on a ship, and what happened was, it's funny, now this was into my service, I think a little while in, and there was an explosion. We were doing an explosion, and I lost hearing in my left ear, and that pretty much kept me shore duty from that time on. And then eventually, after a while, I couldn't get any of my command posts that I wanted to, so they released me from the service with an honorable discharge.
So, did you form any friends when you were?
A few.
Okay.
I had two of them that went for the underwater demolition teams, the SEALs. Yeah, I had a couple of real good friends went into that. And most of the people, yeah, there's a few friends that I have that I knew really well in the service. And the thing of it is, you'll never be closer to another person in your life as when you go through boot camp. That's the closest you'll ever be to another human being, because you rely on each other, and it's a different kind of a bond that you go through.
When you were in the military and you weren't actively going through boot camp,
Mm-hmm.
did you guys do any recreational activities?
Absolutely. Played basketball all the time. Shot hoops. And I boxed in the Navy too a little bit. So I did some exhibition bouts in the service too.
So, when you came back, was Uncle Ed back from the military
Yes, yeah. He was older. My Uncle Ed was older. My Uncle Ed served, he did 9 months, and he was stationed in, I think Da Nang, or in that province of Vietnam. And he was a military police. So his job was to make sure that everything was okay. All of his Army friends, or all the Army personnel, didn't get in trouble and didn't, do things wrong. He was kind of like that.
And did he have any real noteworthy experiences in Vietnam?
He's like the World War II guys. They don't open up much about Vietnam, and a lot of veterans. It's funny because I just took a guy that was a vet, and he served in Vietnam. A friend of mine's down the street, and he contacted Agent Orange, and then he eventually got cancer from that. And they don't talk much about that. They don't talk about their time in country. They don't talk about the time in the service. But in their defense, when they came home, they weren't treated like soldiers. People despised them. They didn't like them because there was some bad publicity when they were in the service of baby killers and this and that. So when they came home, they were spit on and they were looked down upon because they served in a war that nobody thought was a great war. So the Vietnam veterans today are getting their due, but it's a long time overdue.
Yeah, do you go into a little bit more of a in depth about what you like public reaction when the soldiers were coming home?
They spit on them. They called them baby killers. And that's anybody. And the reason it was so bad then was anytime we flew or anytime we did anything, we were in uniform. So when we got off the plane, they knew we were in the service. And then again, if you didn't have your uniform on, your haircut gave you away, because back then it was the real long hair. Well, we were all shaved. We didn't have any hair. So they knew you were in the military. Yeah, it was just they threw rocks at some, and they were never given the respect because the war was never declared a war. Congress never declared it a war. They never gave them the funding for the war. So they just never treated it like that, and they were looked down upon. And it wasn't their fault. My brother was drafted, and a lot of the guys from Vietnam era were drafted. They didn't have a choice. They went there, they served their country proudly, and then they got home, and nobody gave them the respect that they needed. And that was wrong, in my opinion.
So, since then, have you gone to any veterans organizations and
I have. I've attended a lot of things on the Agent Orange that I talked about. because up until recently the Army denied it, and there was a lot of people, and again, I'm not blaming them for what they did. It allowed it, the thing that they spread out of the planes was to kill the foliage so that the patrol people could see. So I don't think they intentionally did anything wrong. You know, it's not like, hey, we're going to kill our own people. They just didn't do the research on it, and a lot of the soldiers come back sick from that. And yeah, I've seen a few of them things in VFW halls and stuff like that. Stuff like that. I've seen.
Have you made any friends after you
Yeah,
went?
yeah. A lot of people that you meet that are like Steve Sudol, who's in the service, and a lot of people that you meet throughout life that were in the service. You thank them for the service, which is what you should do, and you respect them because they. If it's not for people going into the service, Tony, and doing what they do, then you know the young kid protesting on the corner, he can't do that because we'll all be talking a different language. You need people to step up, and you need people to fight for our country because that's what keeps us free and allows us to do the things that we do. So my advice to the kids today is when you see somebody that was in the service, thank him for his service.
So, what do you think are the biggest lessons you've learned from military service?
Respect is the main thing I learned. When you're young, you don't really have respect for a lot of authoritarian figures, but you respect discipline, and the fact that you can do anything you want to do if you put your mind to it. The only thing that's stopping you from doing or being what you want to be is yourself. I learned that for sure.
So, you said that the young kids today need to like have respect. Do you think that the 2 years of military service you were talking about, do you think that?
Yes, absolutely would. Because I think they don't understand what goes behind the man in the uniform. Whether it be a police officer who gets up every day, puts a vest on, and goes out and puts his life at risk every day, or the military man that's out there, goes into battle. They don't realize what entails to that. And you never know that till you walk in that man's shoes. So yeah, I think, and I'm not saying that all kids have to do combat. I mean, there's other avenues they can pursue. There's a lot of branches, a lot of things, a lot of services that need to be done in the service that, you know, and I think a lot of it would be on testing. If you're tested going in and you test high, you could go into mechanics, you could go into electronics, you can go into any, pilot, you could be, a lot of things you could be, and I think testing would allow them to find out what avenue they could pursue, and then, they would do their 2 years, and if they like it, Tony, they don't have to come out in 2 years, they can stay in. I'm saying two years minimum, or maximum.
So, when you were initially coming out,
Mm-hmm.
did you feel the way you feel now about your military service?
I was kind of mad when I got out because of the way we were treated. I didn't think that they respected us. I didn't. And I felt kind of upset because a lot of people have lost their lives in that war, in that conflict. I can't call it a war, in a conflict. And they never got the due. They never got the respect they earned. So at first, I was a little upset. But then, as time goes on, it softens you up, and I become a lot softer now. And I'm thinking, and this goes back to my initial statement, is there's people now, these young servicemen today, that are on their 7th or 8th tour of Afghanistan or Iraq or someplace. and that's 7 tours of being on high adrenaline 24 hours a day. They're faced with a life or death situation. And then they come home. And it's like you're supposed to just turn that switch off and go on with your life. And you can't do that always. So, and when we were in, now my brother served 9 months. You were there for a year, and he served 9 months. And that's usually the length of service, unless you re-up, was usually 9 months to a year of service over time. Now these young men today are doing, multiple tours, and that's because, number one, is they're qualified. It takes a lot of time and effort to teach a person to do what they do, and then they're combat orientated, so they've already been in combat, so they know how to function in combat, so that helps too. But it still plays a toll on your body to go back time after time after time. And you know that. Can you imagine playing basketball game, one right after another? You know what I mean? Sooner or later, it's going to take a toll on you. And that's what these young men are facing today. And women. Young men and women.
And do you think that the government should be a little more active in readjusting these people?
Absolutely. I think they should, there should be, not all kids come out, and I know it's not right to say this, but not all kids walk into the battle and come out of the battle the same way. So yeah, there should be a transitioning time to get them out. And if there is a problem, the VA should step up and work with that soldier or person to ease them back into society rather than just dump them out into society. Because now you've got, I don't know what the count is now, but you've got suicides that happen quite a bit of vets that are suffering from PTSD that don't know what to do, have no avenues to turn to. They either go to drugs or alcohol, and then once they get totally depressed, then they end up taking their own life. And that's all because of the service or some service-related incident. So yeah, I think the government should give more to the vets. Absolutely.
And do you think that you have have you thought up of any possible avenues they could take?
Well, I think the biggest thing is, yes, I do. Number one is, and I've seen this with Steve, vets should be treated a lot more differently than they are. When you have a life, he had lung cancer, and he was terminal. He was going to die. But the service, because they rated him 100% disability, they paid for all of his medications, anything that he needed related to the cancer, they treated. And I think that should be done for all veterans. How many veterans are coming home with limbs that are missing, are disfigured? Physical scars you can see. Missing an arm, missing a leg, you can deal with that. Mentally, those scars are not always seen. And that's the person that gets into certain things. I had a good friend of mine when he came back from Vietnam. His name was Buster. He was a Green Beret. He did 4 tours in Vietnam. When he came back home, he couldn't handle here. So where did he end up? In prison. And this is the kind of things that you need to gradually, he was volatile. I mean, he'd walk into a bar, he had a few beers, somebody'd start talking about, people that were, they're nothing, and then the next thing you know, their fight would break out and he was involved. So they need to transition this people, and any war people or any veterans need to transition out of the service easier.
How do you think the government should handle somebody like Buster, who they know has seen a lot of action and gets caught up in the law?
I think they should do psych evaluation of him. And I think that, I mean, although he's a trained Green Beret and could probably beat most of their psych evaluations, I'm saying that, you know, sooner or later you're going to catch them off guard on something. But it's something that, and it's only, in the defense of the government, the only thing that they can do is if a person asks for help, can they help him? If a person doesn't ask for help, how can you help him? You know, so it's not all the government's fault. You know, it's some of it's the active fighter too, because if he doesn't go to the VA and say, hey, listen, I'm having nightmares, or I'm having this, or I'm having that, or I'm having flashbacks or something. I mean, unless he does that, then, you know, everybody thinks he's doing just fine.
Have you had any experiences where?
No, I was one of the fortunate ones. No problems whatsoever. I mean, I transitioned out just fine, but then again, I didn't see any combat. You know, so I was, you know, luckier than a lot. So, had I saw the combat, yeah, maybe, you know, I don't know, maybe I would be in that position too.
And so, going back to, like, say someone like Buster is, you know, convicted of a crime, do you think that would be a good idea to send somebody like that more to a mental health institution? Or
No, but I think he should be evaluated. Buster was he was a carpenter by trade. When he got out, he was a carpenter. But no, I don't think, and I hate to say that, but if the service did a background check or did a check of how many of our men and women are in prison today because of a service-related problem, I think they'd be amazed at how many people are actually in prison today.
you said you think that he would be that he should be evaluated. Now, if he was evaluated and they did find something wrong with him, how do you think they should go about?
Therapy, something like that. I mean, you know, drugs. VA should be responsible for him. And that's, I guess that's the point I'm taking is the VA should work with him and see what he, you know, what steps can be taken with that individual. Because every case is different. Every case is every soldier is different. Every person's different. You know, so you've got to address the needs of that particular one.
We've talked a lot about the people coming back and how they weren't, you know, they weren't really respected like they
Correct.
should be.
Yeah.
Did you see any effects of, like, maybe a family member of somebody that was coming back?
Yeah, myself included. I was not, the eggs weren't thrown at me, but they dissed me when I walked through the airport. Sure. Yeah. Because they didn't welcome me home with open arms. And it's all because of the reporting of Lieutenant Calley and a few other people back in that time, and the poster boy of a lot of different things that, you know, that they were given the label of baby killers and stuff like that. But we were fighting a war that nobody wanted to be in. The Vietnam conflict started in 1955 with the French trying to get the Catholic religion into Vietnam. The French couldn't do it. They pretty much bailed. And then we went in as advisors in the early 60s. And so that war actually went on from 60, I would say early 50s, late 50s, to 73 or 4. In that span of time, you know, how many soldiers were lost, how many people were in and out, you know. And nobody, they don't thank them for their service. They do now. They are right to this day getting a little bit of respect. And a lot of the awards that they earned in the Vietnam conflict are given out now. A lot of them were missed. Purple Hearts, you know, things like that are given out now. Now, if you talk to a soldier, he's not interested in the acclaim. In other words, the medals really don't mean a lot, you know. Just the respect that, you know, he served and he should get respect when he come home for serving. Just like they do now. These young kids today, when they come home, they're saluted, they're hailed because they're fighting a war that, you know, everybody agrees with. But when they were fighting Vietnam, nobody agreed with that.